The halls of SpaceX after midnight were quieter than the vacuum of space the company sought to conquer. Most of the fluorescent lights buzzed in half-sleep mode, casting an uneven glow over linoleum floors and exposed ducts. At this hour, the engineers had long since gone home or curled up in nap pods, their whiteboards cluttered with fragmented ideas and formulas trailing into nowhere. But one hallway on the second sublevel told a different story. There, on a discarded chalkboard tucked behind storage crates and forgotten office chairs, an impossible equation had appeared overnight. A dense string of symbols, elegant, audacious, had replaced the crude stick figure someone had drawn the day before. The problem it solved: a navigational algorithm for interplanetary transfer orbits using minimal fuel expenditure, a riddle that had been shelved by the brightest minds in the building. Dr. Hayden Leung, one of the lead propulsion theorists, stumbled upon it during a caffeine-fueled search for a missing torque wrench. He froze, squinting at the board as though it were mocking him. Within minutes, others were called in. A cluster of specialists gathered, rubbing their eyes, murmuring numbers under their breath, comparing it to the versions stored in their cloud folders. It didn't make sense, not because it was wrong, but because it was flawless, simplified in a way that none of them had thought possible. No one claimed it. No one had authorization to even be down there past hours. Security footage was checked. The tapes showed nothing. A glitch, maybe, or something more deliberate. By morning, the mystery had wormed its way through the building like a rogue line of code. The phantom mathematician, they joked, but not without a hint of awe. Elon Musk heard about it at 10:42 a.m. via a Slack ping from his CTO. At first, he dismissed it. Probably a prank. But curiosity scratched at his mind all day, like it often did before a new idea took root. By lunch, he asked to see the board himself. Meanwhile, in a forgotten corner of the maintenance locker room, Riley Vega tied her work boots tight and brushed chalk dust from her fingertips. Her janitor's cart squeaked with a limp wheel as she pushed it past labs that held more Nobel dreams than practical results. Her hoodie, oversized and faded navy, smelled faintly of bleach. She kept her head down. Always. That's how you lasted in places like this. Riley had learned how to vanish in plain sight. She clocked in, mopped the floors, emptied the bins, avoided eye contact. No one asked questions. She liked it that way, because questions lead to attention. And attention, in her experience, always led to control, someone trying to fix her, own her, or drag her down. She wasn't here for them. Not really. She was here for the boards. For the equations half-solved and abandoned. For the mental scaffolding that the engineers left behind, like breadcrumbs. At night, after her shifts, she'd quietly retrace those steps, correcting, rebuilding, imagining a different approach. Her brain burned for it. Not recognition, not degrees, just the beauty of logic, of silence, of understanding things others couldn't quite hold in their hands. The board in the sublevel was supposed to be just another whisper into the void. A personal challenge. She hadn't meant for it to be seen, but someone had noticed. Who did this? Elon asked, eyes narrowing as he stared at the chalkboard. He didn't blink much when he was in problem-solving mode. His mind was already reverse engineering the handwriting, trying to decode style from stroke. No idea, Hayden replied. Security footage glitched out. We check logs. No employees registered on this floor after 10 p.m. What about non-employees? Elon asked, now pacing. Hayden frowned. Janitorial crew has 24/7 access, but come on. That's a stretch. People say that about a lot of things before rockets land upright, Elon said flatly. He turned to his assistant. Get me the name of whoever was cleaning this sector last night. The answer came 15 minutes later. Riley Vega, age 26, hired under a third-party vendor. No formal education past GED. No social media. No incident reports. No disciplinary history. No, anything really. She was a ghost with a mop. Bring her in, Elon said. But Riley wasn't interested in being brought anywhere. When they approached her that evening, 2 HR reps and a facility supervisor, she was wiping down the handle of a vending machine with deliberate care. She didn't flinch when they spoke her name, didn't ask what this was about. Just blinked once, then twice, then said, "I'm on shift." "You're being invited to speak with Mr. Musk," one of them said, as if that made things obvious. She looked past them to the vending machine, checking for a smudge she might have missed. "I didn't apply for any promotion," she said simply. "He just wants to talk," said the other, trying to keep the tone light. "I don't do interviews." They looked at each other, unsure. One of them offered a small laugh. "This isn't really an interview, Riley. It's more like curiosity." She didn't smile. Curiosity gets people dissected. The line caught them off guard, and before they could rephrase or plead, Riley was already moving down the corridor, pushing her cart like a soldier exiting a battlefield. That night, she skipped the boards. Too risky. She returned to her studio apartment, a place barely big enough to house her books and a folding bed. She sat on the floor, unzipped her hoodie, and pulled out a small notebook from the lining. It was old, the pages bent and darkened with graphite. She flipped to a sketch she'd done years ago, an engine that rotated its axis mid-thrust to reduce oscillation drift. No one had ever seen it. No one ever would. She traced her finger along the design, not because she doubted it, but because touching it reminded her she was real. At SpaceX, Elon Musk sat alone in his glass-walled office, replaying the security footage, what little there was of it. Mostly static. A flicker at 3:07 a.m. A mop handle appearing out of thin air. That was all. He didn't know what drove him more insane, the brilliance of the equation or the silence of the person behind it. "Who are you, Riley Vega? And why are you hiding?" The whispers didn't die down. They multiplied. By the end of the week, Riley Vega wasn't just a janitor with chalk on her sleeves. She was the anomaly in the basement, the outlier that made entire departments feel both inspired and embarrassed. White-collar scientists began finding reasons to linger in the halls where she worked, eyes subtly watching her movements, wondering if genius really could wear rubber gloves and sweep dust from under coffee machines. The faculty from Caltech had already called. MIT sent a private message through a well-placed consultant. There were invitations to submit papers, proposals for mentorships, internships, fellowships. Every email came wrapped in flattery and veiled expectation, as if the senders thought she'd been waiting her whole life for the right gatekeeper to offer her a key. But Riley didn't want a key. She wanted a lock. Each time someone approached her, she grew more elusive. She stopped lingering near the chalkboards, stopped using the break room, changed her shift from night to early morning. She turned her hoodie darker, stopped wearing the bracelet. It felt like all the walls she had so carefully built for years were crumbling, brick by unsolicited brick. It was late Wednesday when Elon saw her again, through a narrow pane of glass overlooking a loading dock. She was sitting alone on a crate, eating half a sandwich wrapped in tinfoil. Her expression was neutral, her face trained not to reveal the storm of thoughts behind her eyes. But Musk recognized that look. He'd worn it once himself. It was the look of someone being pulled into a world she hadn't asked for, forced to pretend she belonged, or didn't, depending on the room. He didn't approach immediately. He watched, observed the way she held herself. Her movements were efficient, unhurried, but always purposeful. He'd met engineers, prodigies, and savants. Riley wasn't trying to impress anyone. That's what made her different. She didn't need anyone to tell her she was brilliant. She just was. Quietly, invisibly, like gravity. The next day, he walked into the janitor's supply room without knocking. Riley was there, sorting bottles onto a rack. She didn't turn when she heard him. "If it's about the board again, I didn't do it," she said flatly. He leaned against the doorframe. "I'm not here for confessions." "Then why are you here?" He paused, eyes scanning the room. A mop hung from the corner like a wilted flag. The air smelled of ammonia and lemon. He pointed at the rolling cart behind her. "That wheel's busted." "Yeah, I know. You gonna fix it?" She shrugged. "Eventually." "Do you like breaking things or fixing them?" That made her turn, just slightly. Her eyes met his, dark, alert, unamused. "I don't like being asked trick questions." It's not a trick, he said calmly. It's just a pattern. Some people like to dismantle problems. Others like to restore things to what they were. Rare few like both. And what do you like? I like seeing where people fall on the spectrum, he said. Helps me understand them better. Riley narrowed her gaze. You mean control them? He gave a dry chuckle. Maybe once. Not anymore. A silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was calibrated. I'm not here to hire you, Elon said finally, or recruit you, or parade you around in a lab coat. I just want to talk. About what? Not math, he said. Not SpaceX. Not physics. Just minds. Difficult ones. She blinked. That was the first time someone had said the word without implying it was a flaw. He continued, one meeting. No agenda. No pressure. Just you and me in a room once a week. If it doesn't work, you walk. Riley hated negotiations. She hated being seen. But she also hated how part of her wanted to say yes. Not because it was Elon Musk. Not because it was a chance. But because for once, someone was offering a space with no labels, no strings, no fixed outcomes. Just a possibility. So she stared at him, letting the silence stretch longer than most people could handle. Finally, she said, I don't do therapy. He nodded. Good. I'm not offering any. And you don't get to ask about my past. Fair. And I don't owe you anything. Not even eye contact, he said, smiling. She almost smirked. Almost. Fine, she muttered. One meeting. Tomorrow, he said. 4th floor, West Wing. Conference room B. The one with the plants. I hate plants. He raised an eyebrow. Exactly. The next morning, Riley didn't wear her hoodie. She wore a plain t-shirt, her hair still tied in its usual messy knot. She didn't bring her notebook. Didn't bring her walls either, though she regretted at the moment she entered the room. It wasn't what she expected. No sleek surfaces or power chairs. Just a couch, a coffee table, and yes, 3 plants. One of them half dead. Elon was already there, seated cross-legged on the floor, eating a granola bar and looking at a diagram of the SpaceX Raptor engine on his tablet. He didn't look up right away. You're early, he said. I hate being late. Me too. She stayed standing. He gestured toward the floor. Sit wherever you like. She sat opposite him, legs folded, eyes wary. The air was thick with that quiet sort of tension where neither person wants to go first. Then he asked her something she hadn't anticipated. What's the last thing that made you laugh? The question felt like a pebble in her shoe, small but impossible to ignore. I don't remember, she said. Try. She frowned. Okay, there was this guy trying to explain how gravity works using oranges. He dropped one and it rolled under the fridge. And that made you laugh. No, she said. What made me laugh was how serious he got trying to explain that the orange was a metaphor for warping spacetime while crawling on the floor with a ruler. Elon grinned. Sounds like someone I'd hire. You'd fire him in a week. Probably, he agreed. They didn't talk about the chalkboard. Not once. But by the time she left, there was something strange in her chest. Not gratitude. Not trust. Something older. Something simpler. Recognition. The next meeting was held in a different room. This one was Elon's personal thinking space, a minimalist office tucked into the upper west wing of the building, its glass walls filtering soft afternoon light. No assistants. No digital boards. Just quiet. The decor was sparse but deliberate. A tall shelf lined with worn science fiction novels, a few prototype rocket models suspended in midair via invisible threads, and a framed sketch of the Martian terrain in red chalk, annotated with cryptic notations in Elon's own hand. In the center stood a round table with 2 chairs. No desk. No barriers. Riley Vega stepped in like a storm trapped in human form, shoulders tense, arms crossed tight across her chest, chin slightly tilted in defiance. Her boots made a dull sound against the polished concrete floor as she scanned the room without admiration. She wasn't impressed. That was her armor. Indifference. Nice spaceship museum. she said, voice flat. Elon glanced up from a kettle that steamed gently on a side table. Tea. She raised an eyebrow. Seriously? It's oolong. Good for thinking. I'm not here to think. I'm here because someone upstairs thinks this might keep me quiet. Elon nodded, unbothered. Then let's just call this controlled silence. Riley didn't sit. She remained standing, 1 foot angled toward the door, as if she needed the option to escape. You're not a psychologist, she said after a beat. No, Elon replied, pouring himself a cup, but I've needed enough therapy to recognize when someone else would rather break the rules than play the game. She eyed him. And what game would that be? The one where people pretend to be smaller than they are to keep everyone else comfortable. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was a duel. I didn't ask to be found, Riley said sharply. I didn't ask to be followed by cameras and memes either, he said, sipping his tea. Big difference. I mop floors. You launch billion-dollar toys into space. He gave her a slow smile. Toys? I like that. You trying to provoke me? Just checking if you're human, she said. He leaned back slightly in the chair. You think I'm not? I think people like you stop being people somewhere along the way. And people like you, he replied, spend their lives making sure no one ever sees how much they care. That made her blink. Just once. A crack in the facade. But she didn't let it widen. You sit in a glass box, surrounded by yes men. I clean bathrooms. We're not even in the same galaxy. He nodded again. I've heard that before. Try something new. She hesitated. That wasn't the reaction she expected. Most people flinched, defended, or tried to explain their way back to superiority. Elon just absorbed it, like heat into a black panel. No drama, no ego. She stepped forward slowly and finally sat across from him, her arms still crossed, but her weight no longer on the edge of escape. You really don't care what I think of you. I care if it's true, and I care if it's interesting, but I don't care if it's loud. That irritated her. Not because it was arrogant, but because it wasn't. It was honest. Fine, she said. Let's get this over with. Say your piece. I already did, he replied. I just wanted to see if you'd come back. She stared at him hard. You think I'm some kind of project? I think you're sharp enough to know I don't waste time on projects that don't matter. And you think I matter. I think you do everything you can to make sure no one thinks you do. She hated how that landed, how it was both off-base and painfully accurate. So what's your angle, Musk? She asked, leaning forward. What, you want to turn me into some brand story? From janitor to genius, SpaceX's secret weapon? No, that's boring. She scowled. Then what? I want to see what happens if no one tries to shape you, he said. What would Riley Vega build if no one was watching, judging, measuring? What would you design if you didn't need permission? She went silent again. Her fingers tapped once against her elbow. You expect me to believe you'd give me that kind of freedom? I don't expect you to believe anything. I'm just making space. The conversation stalled there. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because something had shifted. Not forward, not back. Just sideways. A diagonal move. Hard to interpret, harder to undo. A full minute passed with no words. Then Riley stood. We done? For now, Elon said. She walked to the door without another glance. But just before she pushed it open, her hand paused for half a second on the handle. A breath caught in her throat. A flicker of hesitation. Not visible to most. But Elon saw it. He didn't comment. Didn't move. The door opened, and she disappeared into the hallway. But that sliver of doubt, that microscopic crack in the armor, was enough. He smiled softly just to himself. Good, he murmured. She's thinking about it. She came back. No announcement. No warning. No formal confirmation. But there she was, Riley Vega, standing in the doorway of conference room B, her silhouette framed by morning light diffused through the frosted glass. She wore the same work pants, the same scuffed boots. This time, Her hoodie was wrapped around her waist, revealing the same gray t-shirt from before, now slightly wrinkled at the collar. She looked tired, but present. Elon didn't say anything when she entered. He simply looked up from sketchpad resting on his knee, an absent-minded doodle of a launch sequence spiraling into abstraction, and nodded once. She walked in, slower than last time, and took the same seat without being asked. This time, she didn't cross her arms. She rested her hands on her thighs, fingers twitching as if playing invisible keys. "I see formulas like music," she said suddenly, without provocation. Her voice was quieter now, not muted by anger but filtered through thought. "Like notations, timing, the rhythms between variables. That's what matters most, not the numbers themselves, but how they move." Elon closed his sketchbook and leaned forward slightly. "And what do they sound like?" She tilted her head, considering. "Depends. Orbital decay. That's a slow cello. Gravitational lensing. Something high and sharp, like wind chimes over broken glass. But the propulsion stuff, that's percussion. It pulses. Has heartbeat." He smiled gently, but not mockingly. "You ever write it down as music?" "I used to," she said, "on graph paper. Then my brother took it and burned it because he said it made me weird." He didn't respond right away. Let the words hang, unjudged. "And now?" he asked. "I do it in my head," she said. "Can't burn that." Elon nodded. "No, but you can still bury it." That made her look up, a flash of challenge in her gaze. "Is this the part where you ask me where it all comes from?" "No," he replied. "This is the part where I ask if you've ever let anyone hear it." Riley hesitated, her jaw clenched ever so slightly. "You don't need to know everything," she said finally. Elon's voice was soft. "No, but you need to choose what to hide." She laughed, not kindly. It was a sharp exhale of sarcasm. "Thanks for the fortune cookie wisdom, Musk." He didn't flinch. "You're allowed to protect yourself. But eventually, you'll either start deciding what parts of you are yours to share, or let the world decide for you." She didn't answer. Her fingers resumed their invisible music. The air between them was dense with things not said. Then Elon leaned back in his chair and said something completely unexpected. "When I was 23, he began, I used to cry in the bathroom. Between coding sessions. I'd be writing something at 3 in the morning, feel everything tightening, and I'd lock the door and just fall apart." Riley blinked. She wasn't expecting a confession, especially not one so plain. "Why?" she asked cautiously. He shrugged. "No sleep, no money, no safety net. I was building something I didn't know how to finish. Everyone thought I was insane. I kind of was." She tilted her head, studying him. "You ever tell anyone that?" He met her eyes. "Only the ones I trust." It wasn't a boast. It wasn't bait. It was a door, left slightly open, no pressure to walk through. She looked away. "I thought you liked being the guy who doesn't feel anything." "I do," he said, "until I don't." That caught her off guard. She gave a half smile, more reflex than choice. That's either genius or garbage. Same thing most days. And then it happened. Quick, involuntary, like a sneeze in a quiet room. Riley laughed. It wasn't long, just a clipped exhale, half a second, like a bubble rising to the surface before she could pop it. But it was real, and her eyes widened a little as if surprised by her own sound. Elon didn't move, didn't draw attention to it. He just smiled to himself and returned to the sketchpad, doodling again. A spiral this time. A comet with a tail made of musical notes. Riley looked around the room as if noticing it for the first time. The way the light hit the potted plant in the corner. The hum of the air vent. The small coffee stain on the floor from last week that no one had bothered to clean. It wasn't a sterile room. It wasn't polished. It wasn't watching her. For the first time, she didn't feel like a specimen under a microscope. She felt seen. She didn't know how to deal with that, so she stood. "Same time next week?" Elon asked without looking up. She paused at the door. "Don't push it." He looked up, that same calm smile playing at the edge of his mouth. "I'm not pushing. I'm just holding the mirror." She opened the door, but this time she didn't flee. She walked out like someone who might actually come back. The room was silent after she left, but it wasn't empty. Elon exhaled and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. One small crack in the armor. One accidental laugh. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was enough. Like the first few meters of a launch. Slow, heavy, reluctant, but rising. The blood on Riley's knuckles had already dried by the time Elon arrived at the precinct. She sat on a metal bench beneath flickering fluorescent lights, one knee bouncing restlessly, a pale bandage wrapped haphazardly around her right hand. Her hoodie was back on, hood up, arms folded, face shadowed in that expressionless mask she wore when the world felt like it had turned against her. Again, Elon didn't speak when the officer handed her over. He signed the release form, nodded politely, and thanked the sergeant as if they were simply picking up dry cleaning instead of a 26-year-old janitor turned mathematical mystery with a broken lip and a criminal charge. They walked side by side toward the car. The night air was heavy with fog and sirens somewhere distant. Riley didn't say a word until they were halfway across the parking lot. "She said something about my mom," she muttered. Elon kept walking. She was drunk. Thought it was funny. A pause. "I didn't." They reached his car, a midnight blue Tesla with dust on the hood and a coffee cup still in the console. Elon opened the door without ceremony and gestured for her to get in. She did, slamming it harder than necessary. He rounded the front, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The car was silent except for the faint hum of electricity. Then Elon spoke. "Why do you always choose pain as a shield?" Riley stared out the window. "Because it's the only thing no one can steal from me." His hands tightened around the steering wheel. Not out of anger. Out of sadness, maybe. Recognition. He didn't answer. Just turned the knob on the dash, and the voice of Johnny Cash filled the cabin. Low, gravelly, aching. "I hurt myself today to see if I still feel." They drove in silence, the road stretching out ahead like a ribbon of unresolved emotion. Streetlights passed overhead in rhythmic pulses, shadows dancing across Riley's face. She didn't flinch when the music hit a nerve. She just leaned her head back against the seat and stared at the ceiling like it might offer answers. Her bandaged hand rested in her lap, fingers twitching as if replaying the fight. "I didn't start it," she said softly. "I didn't say you did," Elon replied, "but I ended it." "You always do." That silence again, but it was different now. Heavier. Not filled with tension, but something deeper. An unspoken agreement that neither of them was equipped for soft edges, but both were starting to reach toward them anyway. "You ever hit someone?" she asked suddenly. Elon's mouth tugged into a crooked smile. "Not since I was 12. Got punched for telling a kid his dad's company was going bankrupt." "Were you right?" "I usually am." She smirked, then winced. Her lip had split in the fight, and the swelling made it sting when she tried to smile. She touched it absent-mindedly. "I don't like people knowing things about me," she said. "I've noticed. But you keep asking." "I'm not asking for answers," he said. "I'm asking if you're tired of hiding." She didn't answer, just turned her head slightly to look at him. "I know what it's like," he added, eyes fixed on the road. "To be angry all the time. To think that if you let your guard down once, even for a second, everything will collapse." Riley looked out the window again. "You don't get it. Try me." She let the words hover for a moment, then dropped them like dead weight. "I used to get locked in closets. My stepdad said it made me quiet enough to think. I did math equations on the walls with my fingernails. That's where I learned the orbits." The song changed. "And you could have it all, my empire of dirt." Elon didn't speak, didn't try to offer platitudes or fix what was broken. He just turned the music up a little louder, letting the lyrics hold what words couldn't. They drove through an industrial section of town where warehouses stood like silent sentinels and neon signs flickered like dying stars. The road was uneven. So was the mood. Riley shifted in her seat, pulling her hoodie tighter. "I don't trust therapists," she muttered. "Neither do I," Elon said. "You're not going to tell me to talk about my feelings." "No," he said, "but I might ask you to stop punching people." She gave a soft laugh. "No promises." They reached her apartment building, a crumbling red brick structure with a rusted mailbox and a broken elevator button. Elon pulled up to the curb and parked. She didn't move to get out. He turned to her, finally meeting her eyes. "You know," he said, "your genius isn't the most important thing about you." She scoffed. "You're the only one who thinks that." "No, I'm just the only one who said it out loud." She looked away, jaw clenched, throat tight. Something about that hit harder than a fist ever could. "Good night, Riley," he said. She opened the door, stepped out, and closed it without slamming. Took 2 steps toward the building, then paused. The fog rolled in heavier now, cloaking her in a halo of mist and streetlight. She didn't turn back, but she raised her voice just enough to be heard through the open window. "You're not as smart as you think you are." "I hope not," Elon said, smiling faintly. "Otherwise, there'd be no reason to keep talking to you." She kept walking, but inside something trembled. Not with fear, with the first small, uncertain flicker of trust. Like the first time a fist unclenches, not to surrender, but to rest. The 3rd-floor conference room was dim, lit only by the overcast daylight pushing through the narrow windows. A fine rain tapped against the glass in no particular rhythm. Nature's percussion, unpredictable and soft. Elon arrived first this time, an open notebook in his lap, and a half-empty coffee beside him. He didn't pace or check his phone. He waited. When Riley Vega entered, she carried something under her arm that looked out of place, out of character, even. It wasn't a mop or a scuffed laptop. It was a notebook, spiral-bound, bulging with dog-eared pages and scraps of paper poking out like feathers. She didn't say hello, just sat across from him and slid the notebook across the table like she was surrendering evidence in a courtroom. Elon looked down at it, then up at her. She wasn't making eye contact. That was new. Usually she stared at him like she was daring him to flinch. "What's this?" he asked softly. "Stuff," she muttered. "Don't make a thing out of it." He opened the cover. Equations. Not ones he recognized, not exactly. They were abstract, layered, nonlinear. Some pages were covered in hand-drawn schematics that looked more like dreams than blueprints, fusion cores shaped like flowers, propulsion graphs with spirals that echoed Fibonacci sequences, thruster assemblies annotated with phrases like, "What if mass could bend choice?" or "0 point doesn't mean zero emotion." And then woven between the diagrams, poems. Some no longer than a sentence. "We don't orbit the sun. We orbit absence. Thrust is the memory of falling upward." Elon flipped slowly, page by page. He didn't ask questions, didn't laugh, didn't interrupt. When he finally looked up, his face was unreadable. And that made Riley visibly uncomfortable. "You hate it," she said. "I think," he said carefully, "this is one of the most important things I've read in the last decade." Riley blinked, her face not quite ready to register shock. "You don't have to pretend." "I'm not." He turned the notebook so a page full of sketch propulsion loops and scratched out poetry faced her. This isn't a report. It's a philosophy. It's a mess. It's potential. A messy, raw, terrifying amount of potential. Riley leaned back, folding her arms like she was wrapping herself in the doubt that had kept her safe all these years. You ever seen what happens when someone like me walks into a boardroom with ideas like that? "I have," Elon said. "They usually get 2 reactions, exploitation or dismissal." She nodded slowly. "Exactly." He closed the notebook gently. "But there's a 3rd path." "Oh yeah," she said. "And what's that?" "Ownership." That caught her off guard. "What?" "You don't need their permission, or their metrics, or their quarterly reports. You need your terms, your language, your vision." She was quiet. The rain picked up slightly outside, and for a moment it filled the silence like a soundtrack to their conversation. I don't want to be part of a machine that eats people like me and spits out patents, she said. You think I don't? He asked. You think I haven't seen brilliant people grind themselves to dust chasing deadlines that were never real? You think I haven't buried geniuses beneath NDAs and headlines? There was pain in his voice now, not performative, but personal, the kind that lingered in the spine. Riley heard it, felt it. She stared at him for a long time. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because I see you trying not to become one of them, he said. But you're building walls instead of paths. I've done that, still do, and I know how lonely it gets. Riley's jaw flexed. Her fingers touched the notebook and traced the edge of the spiral binding like it was the only stable object in the room. You don't get it, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. People like me, we don't get to make demands. We don't get to own the things we create. Elon leaned forward. You do now. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even reassurance. It was a challenge. I'm not looking for salvation, she warned. Neither am I, he replied. But maybe we can build something that doesn't ask you to bleed for every breakthrough. She let that sit in the air, then asked, more softly than before, and if I fail? Then you fail on your terms, he said, without erasing who you are. She exhaled through her nose. Frustration, fear, relief. It was hard to tell. I write poems because if I didn't, I'd start treating numbers like machines. And I draw engines like flowers because otherwise, I'd forget they're supposed to move us forward, not just faster. Elon smiled. Rocket girls don't cry, huh? She almost laughed. Rocket girls cry in metaphor. Maybe that's the fuel, he said. She shook her head, trying not to smile, but failing just a little. Elon tapped the notebook. I want you to build one of these. Pick a design. Start from scratch. But don't do it for me. Do it to prove that your vision isn't just valid, it's necessary. Riley stared at the notebook, then at him. Her expression was complex, somewhere between admiration and fear, between suspicion and hope. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she saw that her brilliance didn't have to be a weapon, that it didn't have to cost her everything to mean something. That perhaps, just perhaps, being vulnerable wasn't the same as being weak. Maybe it was a kind of courage, the kind that launches rockets, the kind that finally lets you rise. Elon spent most of the night reading through Riley's notebook again. He spread the pages across a long and used drafting table in his private lab, the kind of space where most of his ideas were born and many quietly died. There was a strange electricity in the air, like the atmosphere before a launch. The way Riley had layered theoretical physics with emotional logic wasn't just rare, it was unheard of. Her orbital systems model, handwritten in the margin of a page beside a fragment of a poem, outlined a method of trajectory correction that avoided gravitational slingshot dependence entirely. She wasn't just ahead of the curve. She was in another orbit. The next morning, he reached out to an old friend, Dr. Jonathan Caro, a seasoned orbital mechanics lead who consulted frequently with NASA and ESA. Elon sent him the annotated version of Riley's orbital design without including a name. He didn't need to. The work spoke louder than credentials ever could. Caro's response came quickly. Whoever wrote this, we need to talk. This is revolutionary. Elon smiled and made a mistake. He thought she'd be proud, or at least curious, maybe even excited. He didn't expect the fury. Riley found out 2 days later. Caro had sent a follow-up email asking for a meeting with the mind behind the math, and one of Elon's aides, unaware of the need for discretion, mentioned it in passing as Riley walked by the elevator. She froze mid-step. Her hand gripped the railing. Her heartbeat thundered. 10 minutes later, she stormed into Elon's office. You share my notebook, she demanded, voice shaking, not just with rage, but betrayal. Elon looked up from his desk. I didn't attach your name. That's not the point, she snapped. You don't get to decide what parts of me get shown to the world. He stood slowly, his expression open but firm. I thought the work deserved to be seen. You thought, she said, almost laughing. You thought you'd do me a favor without asking? Without even telling me? It wasn't about credit, Riley. Then what the hell was it about? He paused, giving your ideas a chance to breathe. Her fists clenched. You don't have the right. There was silence. Heavy, dense. Elon didn't fill it with platitudes. He didn't defend himself with authority. Instead, he asked the question that had been sitting on his tongue since the first time she'd let him see behind the wall. Are you afraid of being stolen or being seen? That stopped her cold. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Her shoulders heaved once, and for the first time since they met, her armor cracked wide open. I'm afraid, she said, voice hoarse, that if people see me, really see me, they'll hate what they find. She dropped into a chair, the weight of it all finally crushing through her posture. Her hands trembled. She wiped her face and then gave up, letting the tears fall freely. Elon didn't move, didn't interrupt. He just stood nearby, not as a mentor or a billionaire or a genius, but as a man who had felt that same fracture in his soul once. She cried for a long time. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet kind of crying that comes from years of being invisible on purpose. I didn't ask to be known, she said between breaths. I know. I didn't want to be a discovery. You're not, he said gently. You're a person, with genius, with scars, with fire. She shook her head. You don't understand what it's like to feel like a ghost in your own life. I do, Elon replied softly. More than you know. But you're not a ghost, Riley. You're the gravity. That made her pause. The metaphor landed, because he meant it, and because a small part of her wanted to believe it. I'm not ready, she said. You don't have to be, he answered. You just have to choose what parts of yourself deserve air. She looked up at him, eyes bloodshot and raw. And if I choose wrong, then you'll try again, he said. That's how humans work. We test. We iterate. There was a beat, a long one. Then she stood without another word, grabbed her notebook, and walked out. The door clicked softly behind her. Elon didn't chase her. He sat down at his desk and exhaled slowly, the moments settling into the room like ash after a fire. He didn't know if she'd come back, but he knew better than to try to force the arc of someone else's healing. Some people need space to breathe. Others need time to recognize they're suffocating. The next morning, at 9:06 a.m., Riley walked back into the same room. No hoodie, no storm, just her notebook under one arm. I'm not here to say thank you, she said, standing in the doorway. Okay, Elon replied, not looking up. And I'm still pissed. Good, he said. That means you're still you. She smirked. A real one this time. Brief. Honest. I added a new page, she said, placing the notebook on the table between them. He opened it and found a new schematic, clean, elegant, bold. A propulsion model shaped like a spiral galaxy, annotated with a single line written in the margin. What if we're meant to expand without erasing ourselves? He looked up. Riley sat down finally, not to run, to build. The conversations evolved. What began as sharp-edged, guarded exchanges soon turned into something richer, philosophical, technical, and at times achingly personal. Riley no longer came to the sessions with her arms folded or her face half hidden behind sarcasm. Instead, she brought questions. Not just about combustion ratios or orbital resonance, but about silence, why it felt louder than noise. About isolation, why it lingered even in a crowded room. About the void, both in space and in the soul. Elon didn't offer answers. Not always. Sometimes he pushed back. Sometimes he redirected. Sometimes he simply sat with the question until the silence felt like acknowledgement rather than absence. It was during one of these moments, in a sun-drenched room that smelled faintly of solder and machine oil, that Elon handed her a small box. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing it suspiciously. He tapped the side with a smile. "A challenge. There's a student engineering competition coming up. Build a working ion propulsion prototype, miniaturized. Something clean, elegant, smart. I want you to enter. I'm not a student. You are if you accept the assignment." She opened the box. Inside were components, basic, raw, but promising. Wires, a microcontroller, magnet coils. She turned one over in her hand, expression unreadable. "I don't work well in groups," she said. "That's why it's the perfect challenge," he replied. Riley hesitated, then looked up. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Watching you grow." "Yeah, a little." She rolled her eyes. "Ugh." But 2 days later, she showed up in the student lab, hoodie sleeves rolled, hair still in its usual knot, but her notebook in hand and eyes scanning the room like a wary animal testing the edges of a new enclosure. The others weren't engineers. Not yet. Just kids in their early 20s with sharp minds and louder voices. Riley didn't speak much at first. She observed, sketched, built in silence. But as the prototype took shape, so did something else. Connection. It was small at first. A shared laugh over a miscalculation. A compliment on a particularly clever solution. One of the students, a girl named Priya, offered Riley a coffee without being asked. Riley accepted it, confused, then smiled. An honest one. Each day brought something new. A glitch in the system that required collaboration. A circuit failure that forced late-night troubleshooting. A joke so dumb she laughed without meaning to. And slowly, the edges softened. She wasn't just the girl in the hoodie with the secret mind. She became part of something. A team. Not because she had to be, but because she chose to be. Elon watched from a distance, checking in periodically, offering advice when asked but never hovering. He knew better than to crowd a launch. But late one evening, long after the lab had emptied, he returned to find the lights still on. The hum of the air system echoed down the corridor. As he approached, he saw Riley alone, seated on the floor beside the workbench, knees pulled to her chest, notebook clutched tightly in her arms. She didn't hear him at first. When she did, she didn't pretend to be fine. "I keep thinking it's all going to fall apart," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the floor. Elon stepped closer but didn't sit. He knelt, just enough to meet her gaze at eye level. "Why?" She shook her head. "Because it always does. Good things. They don't last for people like me. Something breaks. Or someone does. Or I say the wrong thing. Push too hard. Shut down. And they stop trying." He watched her carefully. "And you're afraid," he said, "that when that happens, you'll be left behind again." She nodded. "Maybe," he said, "that's what growing up really is." She looked up, startled. "Learning," he continued, "that sometimes things do fall apart. Projects fail. People walk away. Engines misfire. Emotions get messy. But just because it all breaks doesn't mean you have to." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Riley stared at him, blinking fast. Her fingers clenched around the notebook, like it was an anchor. "What if I'm not strong enough to keep it together?" she whispered. "You don't have to be," he said. "You just have to be strong enough to come back." A beat, then two. She wiped her face with her sleeve, sniffling once. "This thing we're building. I want it to work," she said. "It will," he answered, "because you're not doing it alone." That sentence hit her harder than she expected. The realization that she had let someone help, that she had stopped gripping her solitude like a weapon and opened a door, even just a crack. She looked down at the ion prototype beside her. Small, unfinished, wires tangled, power unit exposed. It looked fragile, but it was hers. Hers and theirs. A collective effort born from trust. Riley stood slowly, stretched her legs, and set the notebook on the bench with more care than usual. Then she looked at Elon and said simply, "Thanks." He nodded. "Now," she added, clearing her throat, "you can go before this turns into a therapy session." He laughed and held up his hands. "I'm going." As he left, Riley returned to the bench. She placed her hands on the components, eyes scanning the half-complete engine. And for the first time in her life, she didn't build from fear. She built from hope. The auditorium was humming. Rows of spectators filled the seats, students, professors, engineers, mentors, judges, each of them waiting, some nervously shuffling papers, others chatting in low tones. The student engineering competition had become an annual showcase of innovation and young brilliance, but this year, the air felt different. as if something truly unusual was about to happen. Backstage, Riley Vega adjusted the collar of her shirt, tugged once at the hem of her gray hoodie, which she'd chosen to keep, not out of habit, but principle. Her hair was pulled back in its usual knot, this time neater, more deliberate. She looked at the ion propulsion prototype on the wheeled cart in front of her. Sleek, clean, elegant. A machine born not just from theory and calculation, but from collaboration, mistakes, and something she never expected to allow: trust. She inhaled, deep and steady. Then the curtain opened. The spotlight didn't faze her. The microphone didn't either. She stepped forward with the prototype beside her and began speaking, not in the cold, sterile cadence of academia, but in her own voice. Real, direct, fluid. She explained how the system worked, how it manipulated charged particles with optimized energy efficiency, how it reduced fuel needs by 17% in small-scale, unmanned crafts. She even paused for a moment to describe the emotional parallel, how building it felt like teaching herself to breathe again. The room was utterly silent by the end. And then thunder. Applause erupted. Not polite or obligatory, real, electric, rising to its feet. A standing ovation. Judges leaned in to shake her hand. Students from other teams clapped with genuine awe. Priya, her teammate, had tears in her eyes. One of the professors mouthed the words "unbelievable." And Riley? She smiled. Not the half-smirk of deflection or the tight-lipped wince of someone bracing for disappointment. She smiled fully, wide, honest, radiant. A smile that said, "I belong here and I earned this." At the far end of the auditorium, standing against the wall near the exit, Elon watched with his arms crossed and his expression quiet. He didn't clap. Not because he wasn't proud, but because he was in awe. He'd seen rockets soar, code come to life, markets shift overnight. But nothing quite matched the sight of a soul remembering its own worth. He didn't stay for the photos or the trophies. He slipped away before the crowd spilled into the halls, and an hour later found himself on the roof of the campus building where it all began. Conference room be just 3 floors below. The wind was cool, carrying the smell of metal, distant engines, and something faintly green from the trees lining the back of the property. Elon leaned against the rail, the city lights blinking in quiet patterns below. Footsteps approached. Riley. Her hoodie was off now, slung over one shoulder. She wore a dark t-shirt smudged with oil stains and graphite dust. In one hand, she held the folded speech she never ended up needing. "You disappeared," she said. "You didn't need me there," Elon replied. "I kinda did." He looked over at her. "Not to fix anything," she added. "Just to see it." "I saw it." They stood in silence, gazing at the skyline. No noise between them. Just the kind of peace that only comes after something deeply earned. "You don't need to run anymore," Elon said quietly. She didn't answer right away. Her arms rested against the railing. Her fingers tapped the metal thoughtfully. "Maybe I never needed to run," she said. "Maybe I just needed to stop running for myself." He nodded, pulling something from his jacket pocket, a slim white envelope, thick, sealed. He handed it to her. She frowned. "What is it?" "A letter of recommendation," he said. "No addressee. You fill that in. Wherever you want to go, Caltech, JPL, CERN, or nowhere at all. It's not a push, just an option." She took the envelope and held it loosely, looking down at the seal like it weighed more than paper should. "I'm not sure where I want to go," she whispered. "You don't have to know yet," he said. "But when you do, you'll have a door ready." Her eyes met his. There was no condescension in his face. No pride to be claimed. Just presence. "You know," she said, voice low, "a lot of people tried to fix me." "I know. They poked, labeled, diagnosed, evaluated. Wanted to turn me into something they understood. And I didn't." She smiled softly. "No, you just stayed." "That's the hard part," he said. "Fixing is easy. Being there when someone fixes themselves, that's where everything changes." She looked back out at the city, then down at the envelope in her hands. The wind picked up slightly, fluttering the edges. She didn't let go. "I'm not a janitor anymore," she said. "No," Elon replied. "You never were." "I'm not a genius either," she added. "That," he said, "is up for debate." They laughed, soft, almost identical in tone. The kind of laugh that doesn't need a punchline, just understanding. The night stretched long, calm, and open ahead of them. And for once, Riley Vega didn't feel like she was waiting for something to collapse. She felt like something had begun. They met again, without fanfare. No announcement, no expectation. Just a quiet morning on the edge of the SpaceX complex, where concrete met sky and the noise of the world faded to a hum beneath their feet. Riley and Elon sat on the ledge of a flat rooftop, rarely used by anyone but birds and the occasional insomniac engineer. The city stretched out in the distance, its skyline softened by the light of early sun, pale and slow to rise. Riley had brought coffee this time, a thermos she didn't offer, but that sat beside her nonetheless. Her boots were dusty, her t-shirt smudged with oil from the student lab. Her hoodie was folded in her lap, like a safety net she wasn't sure she needed anymore. For several minutes, they said nothing. Just watched the sky changing color. The silence between them had grown familiar, not awkward, like background noise to something more important. Then, without speaking, Riley rolled up her left sleeve. She did it slowly, deliberately, not as a show, but as a quiet offering. The scar was long and pale now, faded over time, but unmistakable, tracing a thin, irregular path across her forearm. It wasn't the kind of mark someone would notice unless she pointed it out, but it was permanent and personal. She didn't look at Elon. Her eyes stayed fixed on the skyline, but her voice was steady. "I was 16 when it happened. No one remembers what caused it. I mean, I do, but they don't. I don't think anyone even noticed how quiet I got after." Elon didn't interrupt. "I waited that night," she continued. "Not just for someone to come in, but for someone to notice. A teacher, a neighbor, anyone who might have thought, she's too quiet, she's too still. But no one did. I was just invisible." Her fingers hovered near the scar, but didn't touch it. "That's the night I stopped believing anyone was going to save me. Stopped hoping that someone might knock on the door and say, 'You don't have to do this alone.'" A long pause followed. Then Elon said gently, "But you showed up." She turned her head slightly toward him. Her eyes weren't cold. Not now. They were glassy, unsure. "What?" "You waited for someone to come, and no one did. But eventually you came. You got up. You moved forward. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not all at once, but you didn't stay in that room." She blinked slowly, and for once didn't look away. He wasn't praising her. He wasn't making a speech. He was simply stating a truth. "I don't talk about it," she said. "You don't have to," Elon replied. "Scars don't need storytelling. They just need space." She nodded slowly, pulling the sleeve back down, not to hide the scar, but to close the moment. "I always thought," she said softly, "that being strong meant not needing anyone. That if I could do everything myself, I wouldn't owe anyone the chance to hurt me. And did it work? For a while," she said, "until I realized I was building a fortress that I couldn't leave." Elon leaned back, resting his arms behind him as he looked at the pale blue sky. A jet streaked overhead, high, fast, distant. "I used to think that burying the hard parts of me would protect everyone around me," he said. "That if I just stayed focused on rockets, on code, on solving the next impossible thing, nothing would break me. But it wasn't protection. It was fear, dressed up like discipline." Riley looked down at her hands. "When did it change?" "I'm not sure it ever fully has," he said honestly. "But people like you help." She let that sit. Then she said, almost as if testing the words on her own tongue, "The darkest places create the most stubborn lights." Elon looked at her, surprised. "That's what you said to me, the day of the prototype." A small, sad smile touched her lips. It stuck. She hesitated, then added, "Timosia. That's the word my mother used. Stubbornness. It was never a compliment when she said it, but I think it saved me." He nodded slowly. "And now, it's going to move you forward." Another silence grew between them, not empty, but full of everything they didn't have to say. Riley glanced upward. The sky was softening now, streaks of morning gold pushing through blue. The air smelled of sun-warmed steel and distant ocean. "You know," she said, "I don't think I'm running anymore. Not from people, not from opportunity, not even from myself." "That's a big thing to stop running from," Elon replied. She gave a short laugh. "Tell me about it." Then, without looking at him, she said, "Do you think people like us can ever really be normal?" He smiled faintly. "I don't think we were meant to be normal." "Then what were we meant to be?" He thought for a long second, then said, "Satellites, maybe. Moving through space. Alone sometimes, but capable of choosing who we orbit." That line landed. Quiet, profound, and unexpected. She turned her head and looked him in the eye. Really looked. No sarcasm. No flinch. Just presence. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not fixing me. For not needing to." His voice was low. "That's not my job." "What is?" "To stay," he said. "To witness." They sat for a while longer, watching the sky brighten. No more confessions. No more metaphors. Just two people, once lost in their own silence, now sharing a peace neither of them had ever thought possible. Above them, the world kept spinning, but for a moment, everything was still. And in that stillness, they were not broken. They were aligned. The decision to go back wasn't sudden. It came in fragments, after long silences, quiet reflections, and conversations where Riley found herself saying things she never thought she'd speak aloud. Trauma had a way of becoming architecture, she realized. You lived inside it long enough, and even the walls began to feel like safety. But now, she wanted to see the place that built those walls. Not to reclaim it, not to forgive it, just to understand. Elon didn't offer to come. He didn't need to. She asked. It was a crisp, gray afternoon when they pulled up to the corner lot where the house still stood. A single-story shack with flaking white paint, a collapsed porch step, and windows either boarded up or shattered. The front gate leaned like a drunk, and the fence was choked with weeds. Time had not been kind, but then neither had the house. Riley stepped out of the car before it had fully stopped. She didn't rush. She didn't freeze. She just stared at it like a puzzle she already knew the shape of, but had never solved. Elon stayed by the car, leaning against the door, giving her space. He knew this wasn't a moment for words. It was a moment for distance, the respectful kind. She stepped through the warped gate and walked up the cracked path. The door wasn't locked. It never had been, even when she lived there. She pushed it open and was greeted by the smell of rot and dust and something else, memory maybe. The air was thick and quiet, like the house had been holding its breath for years, waiting for her to return. Inside, it was just as broken as she remembered. The kitchen tiles were cracked. A chair lay on its side in the living room. The wallpaper peeled like skin. But it wasn't the wreckage that hit her. It was the small, forgotten things that somehow remained. A sticker she once placed on a cupboard door. The rusted handle of the drawer where she used to hide comic books. The scratch marks on the wall by the pantry where she'd once tried to measure her height. She moved carefully, each step an echo of someone smaller, more afraid. Then she saw it, half buried under a pile of torn magazines and dead leaves. A thin, faded children's book with a bright orange cover. Physics for Curious Minds. The edges were curled, the spine nearly broken. She bent down, hands trembling slightly, and lifted it free. On the inside front cover, in crooked block letters, was her name. Riley Vega, written with a pink glitter pen, long dried up. She hadn't remembered owning it, but it remembered her. And just like that, the tears came, not dramatic, not gasping. Just steady, quiet, relentless. They fell down her face as if they'd been waiting for this moment. Not of pain, but of witnessing. She sat down on the dusty floor and held the book against her chest like it was a piece of herself she didn't know had gone missing. No one came to interrupt. No one yelled. No one called her name. She stayed like that for a while. When she finally stepped back outside, Elon was still where she'd left him, leaning against the car, arms folded gently, eyes watching her without intrusion. She walked up slowly, her hands still holding the book. "I'm not this," she said. He didn't flinch. He didn't try to soften it. "No," he said, "you're not. But this is part of what made you." She looked down at the cover again. Her name, still barely visible in faded ink. "I thought coming back would feel like falling into a trap. Like I'd be 12 again, stuck and small." "Do you?" he asked. She shook her head. "No. I feel like I'm the one holding the door this time." He didn't smile. He didn't need to. They got back in the car. The drive home was quiet. Not because there was nothing to say, but because some things are better shared through silence. Riley kept her hand resting near the window, fingers outstretched against the rushing wind, her hair lifting gently in the breeze. She let the air move through her, as if it were rinsing out everything that had clung to her for too long. Elon drove carefully, one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely against the console. He glanced at her only once, when she turned her face into the wind with her eyes closed. There was peace there, not the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger. Healing. At a red light, she opened her eyes and looked at him. "You ever go back?" He didn't pretend not to understand. "Once. A long time ago. And it didn't change the past," he said, "but it changed the shape of the shadow it cast." She nodded. That made sense. When they returned to the campus, she didn't head straight to the lab. She walked instead. Slowly, the book still in her hand. No backpack, no armor, just the weight of memory, balanced now by the strength of perspective. Elon watched her go, and in that moment he knew. This was it, the ignition. All the progress before, the trust, the tears, the prototype, the rooftop confessions, those were the countdown. But this was the launch. Because it's one thing to build engines. It's another thing entirely to choose when to lift off. And Riley Vega, for the first time in her life, was no longer surviving the pull of gravity. She was rising through it. The email came at 9:42 a.m., and for a few moments, Riley Vega just stared at it. She was seated at her usual station in the student lab, the one tucked in the far corner, where the sunlight filtered in like curiosity through an open question. Her notebook lay open beside her, a graphite sketch of a new thrust configuration, still unfinished. Around her, the room buzzed softly with voices and tools, with students troubleshooting circuits and adjusting parameters. But for Riley, the world stilled. The subject line read, "Offer a fellowship, Novodyne Systems / SpaceX Joint Research Initiative." Her thumb hovered over the screen for a second before tapping it open. The message was formal, polished, written in a tone of admiration disguised as professionalism. Novodyne Systems, one of the most advanced propulsion research firms in the country, had partnered with SpaceX on a new experimental program, and they wanted her. A full research fellowship, relocation covered, mentorship track, and a junior researcher position on a project called Aurora, a bleeding-edge propulsion modeling initiative using quantum-level simulations and real-time AI-assisted adjustment. They had reviewed her notes. They had studied her designs. And they had made their decision. She reread the message 5 times. It didn't feel real. After the 6th reading, she stood up, slowly walked to the hallway, and leaned against the cool metal of the wall. Her hands were shaking. She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Instead, she left the lab and made her way to the upper balcony, where Elon often worked when he needed quiet. Sure enough, he was there alone, shoes off, legs crossed on a cushioned bench, sketching something unintelligible on a tablet. The sun glinted off his mug of coffee. "You," she said, stopping in the doorway, "are way too calm for someone who just detonated my life." He looked up, squinting against the light. "Novodyne." She raised her phone in reply, screen still glowing with the offer. He nodded. "I figured they'd move fast." Riley walked over and sat on the edge of the bench, her notebook still tucked under her arm, like a child carrying a diary. "They offered me a full fellowship, research funding, a position on Aurora, and..." She let the word hang between them. I don't know, she said finally. I mean, I do, but it's terrifying. Elon set the tablet down and leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. Want to talk about it? She shook her head. I want you to tell me it's okay to be scared. It's more than okay, he said. It's necessary. Fear means you're standing at the edge of something big enough to matter. She looked down. What if I fail? He smiled, not dismissively, but with recognition. Failure is part of flight. You burn, you stall, you spin. That's how you learn to steer. The real failure is never launching. She exhaled sharply through her nose. You should trademark these lines. You already understand more than I did at your age. She paused, unsure whether to be flattered or afraid of that comparison. I'm not ready. No one is, he replied. You say yes, and then you catch up in real time. That's how all of this works. But I'd be leaving behind everything that finally feels safe. That's the trap, he said softly. You worked so hard to build this version of yourself, strong, steady, seen. But growth doesn't happen in safety. It happens when you risk becoming. She turned her head slightly to look at him. And what if I end up alone again? This time, Elon didn't answer with a theory or a metaphor. Instead, he reached for the one thing that always spoke louder than advice, her notebook. He picked it up from her lap, opened it gently, and held it in both hands. You won't, he said, because you'll never be without this again. This isn't just where your mind lives, it's where you live now. You brought yourself back. And no one, not time, not distance, not fear, can take that from you. Riley stared at the familiar pages. The equations, the scribbles, the lines of poetry written in margins. She had once treated this notebook like a lifeboat, but now it felt like compass. She brushed a thumb across the edge of the cover and whispered, I want it. You want the offer. I want the next step, she said, not because I'm running. Not because I have to prove anything, but because I want to build something bigger than I am. Elon nodded, leaning back again. That, he said, is how I knew it was time for you to leave. She tilted her head. You've been waiting for this. No, he replied. I've been hoping for this. Waiting implies control, but this moment, it belongs to you. She stood up slowly, the notebook pressed to her chest, the phone still in her hand. The sky above them was a soft wash of cloud and light, blue stretching far past what either of them could see. When do I tell them yes? She asked. You already did, he said. She didn't cry. Not this time. This was something else. A stillness, a clarity, a lift. That night, Riley didn't go back to the lab. She walked the length of the campus instead, thinking about every wall she'd once leaned against, every door she'd once avoided. She passed the chalkboard where it all started, still stained with old ink, still slightly crooked. She touched it once, like you touch the doorframe of a childhood home, then turned away. By the time she got to the gate, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. She wasn't running anymore. She was ready to launch. It started with a whisper on paper. One evening, a few days after Riley accepted the fellowship, she sat alone at the edge of the rooftop terrace, the same one where so many moments had happened before, breakthroughs, confessions, doubts, and silences. The sky was thick with low clouds, and the campus below was quiet, wrapped in twilight. Her notebook was open in her lap, but this time, she wasn't sketching propulsion systems or threading poetry into equations. Instead, she held a single sheet of off-white stationery. Not the kind she usually used. This one had texture, weight, the kind you pick when what you're writing is meant to last. She had been carrying the words for years. They began pouring out slowly, line by line, not in equations, but in sharp, deliberate phrases. Dear Ms. Hall, you probably don't remember me. That makes sense. You had a lot of files. I was just one of them. Riley Vega, placed in the Klein Street house in 2011. You left me there. The pen hesitated. You left me when I needed someone to look me in the eye and say, you matter. Instead, you said, it's not my call, and walked out the door. You didn't come back. And I stayed. Her hand trembled as she wrote, but I'm still here. And you didn't kill me. You didn't break me. You almost did. But almost doesn't count. I'm writing this to say that you didn't win. This letter is my victory cry." She paused again, breathing slowly, grounding herself. She wasn't shaking with anger. Not anymore. It wasn't about rage now. It was about reclaiming voice. The next day, she brought the letter to her regular meeting with Elon. She didn't say anything when she entered the room. Just sat down, placed a red envelope in front of her, and looked at him. "I wrote something," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "For someone who doesn't deserve to hear it." She opened the envelope carefully, removed the folded page, and began to read aloud. Her voice didn't waver. It wasn't theatrical, just steady, sharp, clear. Word after word carried the weight of silence once swallowed, wounds once left unnamed. She read the full letter, every paragraph. From the bitterness to the grief to the moment, she realized that surviving was not the same as healing, and that healing was something she now wanted. When she finished, she folded the letter again and placed it back in the envelope with a care that felt ceremonial. Elon didn't speak for several seconds. His gaze remained on her face. Not as a teacher, not even as a friend, just as a witness. "Why now?" he asked quietly. Riley looked down at the envelope, running her finger along the sealed edge. "Because I don't want this pain to just protect me anymore," she said. "I want it to do something, to mean something. If I can turn this into a tool, maybe it can be used for more than just defense." She looked up. "I want to protect other people. People like me. Kids who think they're invisible. I don't want to be the one yelling from a fire escape anymore. I want to build the ladder." Elon nodded slowly. His voice was low, almost reverent. "When you turn trauma into a bridge," he said, "you create a path where there was only a void." Riley's eyes didn't fill with tears this time. They burned, but not with sadness, with conviction. "I'm not sending the letter," she said. "It's not for her. It's for me." She slipped it back into the red envelope and placed it inside her notebook, sliding it between two pages covered in math and sketches. To remember that the past can scream as loud as it wants," she said, "but I don't have to echo it. I can respond. With choice." There was a long, still moment between them, a shift in the air, something irreversible. Riley stood, closed the notebook, and pressed it against her chest. "This place, this version of me, it matters, and I want to carry it forward. Not bury it, not pretend it didn't exist, but take it with me like a scar that glows, not one that hides." Elon smiled faintly. "Scar tissue is tougher than the skin it replaced." "That's the point," she said. They left the room together. No more talk about propulsion systems or simulations. Just quiet understanding, heavy with something deeper than science, humanity. That night, Riley sat at her desk and added a small note inside the back cover of her notebook. It was the first personal thing she'd ever written directly into it. "I am not what happened to me. I am what I decide to become." She stared at the line, then underlined the last word twice. Then she placed the red envelope inside the notebook one last time, closed it, and set it gently on her desk. Not as a shield, as a symbol. She was no longer building walls. She was building bridges. Novodyne was everything Riley expected, and more. The labs were spotless, humming with machines that seemed to breathe logic. The halls echoed with fast footsteps and faster ideas. Researchers darted in and out of glass-walled rooms, clutching tablets and caffeinated ambitions. Everyone spoke in shorthand, magnetic field tolerances, data string anomalies, ion convergence fluctuations. It was a different language, one she understood, one she'd waited her entire life to be part of. But it was exhausting. Each morning began before sunrise. Each evening ended after dark. Riley buried herself in simulations, test cycles, whiteboard sprints. Some days, she'd go hours without hearing her own voice. People respected her, her mind at least, but no one really saw her. Not like before, not like him. She didn't miss SpaceX's walls or its chalkboards or even the cafeteria coffee. What she missed was quieter, simpler, a voice that didn't need translation. It was after a particularly brutal day. Her third prototype had failed during vacuum simulation, and a senior researcher made a comment that sounded too much like "you're just here to check a box," that she walked back to her apartment, dropped her bag, and stared at the phone on her kitchen counter. She hadn't called Elon since she arrived. She didn't want to seem weak. She didn't want to need him. But she missed the way he made space feel human, not just cold and vast. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the phone. She didn't overthink it. Just hit call. The ring only sounded once before he answered. "Riley." She exhaled. "Hey." A beat passed. Then, softly, "Can I just hear your voice?" There was no hesitation. "Always." Neither of them said anything for a few seconds. The line stayed open, a quiet hum bridging the miles between them. She sat on the floor of her kitchen, leaning back against a cabinet, knees pulled up. On the other end, Elon paced slowly across his office, a single desk lamp casting long shadows on the blueprints behind him. "I thought I was ready for this," she said eventually. "And maybe I am, but some days feel hollow." "That's not failure," he replied. "That's transition." Riley stared at the ceiling. "Do you ever feel like you got everything you wanted, but left part of yourself behind to get it?" "All the time," he said. "I miss the rooftop. I miss the silence." They both smiled at that, unseen but known. "You want to talk about something impossible?" Elon asked. "Always." "Okay, let's start with black holes." "Safe choice," she teased. "Existential dread and physics. Very on brand." He chuckled. "They aren't just destruction, you know. They're preservation. Information can't be erased in the universe. It has to go somewhere. So you're saying nothing truly disappears?" "Not even you," he said, and there was something soft and certain in his voice that made her heart ache in a good way. They talked for another hour. About gravity wells. About the flavor of dark chocolate. About fear. How it never really goes away, but can be repurposed. How sometimes fear just wants to be seen too. Then out of nowhere, Elon said, "You remember what I told you about engines? That they're like emotions. If you don't control them, they consume you?" "No," he said, gently amused. "The other thing." Riley thought for a second, then shook her head even though he couldn't see her. "You," he said, "are both the fuel and the destination." She laughed. "Poetic, Musk. Getting soft in your old age?" "Maybe," he said, "but that doesn't make it any less true." She let the silence stretch after that, but it wasn't empty. It was rich with everything unspoken, everything safe between them. "I don't want to need you," she admitted quietly. "You don't," he said. "You choose me. There's a difference." Her throat tightened. "Then I choose you. Just not every day. Just when it matters. That's when it counts." Another long pause. "I wish the world had more people like you," she said. Elon leaned back in his chair, eyes closing for a second. "The world needs more people like you, Riley. People who break cycles and still build bridges." "I don't always know who I am here." "You're the same person," he said, "just stretched further." Stretched hurts. Growth always does. It was past midnight when they finally stopped talking. She was curled on the couch now, blanket half draped over her, the lights dimmed. He could hear the fatigue in her voice, and she could hear the calm in his. Neither of them said goodbye. The call ended not with words, but with the kind of silence that doesn't close something, it completes it. Riley didn't sleep right away. She sat up and reached for her notebook, the one that had traveled with her across cities, ideas, and versions of herself. She opened it to a blank page and wrote, "Distance is just space between echoes, and echoes always find their way back." She underlined it, closed the book, and placed it by her bed. They were miles apart now, but they had never felt closer, because in the end, what tied them together wasn't intellect. It was humanity, the shared weight of having been broken, and the stubborn beauty of learning how to rise anyway. The conference room was filled with light, but Riley Vega couldn't feel any of it. She stood at the edge of a large display screen, one hand gripping a digital pointer, the other tightening involuntarily by her side. Rows of executives, engineers, and guests filled the auditorium-style room at Novodyne, waiting for her to present the latest results from Project Aurora. It was the biggest moment of her career so far, her ideas, her math, her team. But something was wrong. As she opened her mouth to speak, the slides blurred. Her heart skipped, then hammered. Her throat closed. A sudden flush ran up her neck, her skin burning, her limbs heavy. She couldn't breathe properly, not the way she needed to. The words backed up behind her teeth, trapped. A second passed, then another. The silence grew awkward. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else whispered. Riley blinked, stepped back, and turned sharply on her heel. She walked fast, not running but close, out of the room, down a hallway, and into the nearest restroom. The door clicked behind her. She locked it. Then the dam broke. She pressed both palms to the cold edge of the sink, gasping. Tears spilled over without resistance, falling silently, as if her body had simply reached its limit. Her chest tightened, the familiar ache of a panic attack crawling in, the old ghosts she thought she'd outgrown, come knocking again in their same tattered clothes. She stared into the mirror, and what she saw wasn't the woman who had built engines from stardust, who had turned pain into propulsion. She saw a version of herself she thought was gone, the girl from the Klein Street house, the one who cried alone at night with a broken physics book in her hands, the one who believed invisibility was safer than trying. Her reflection looked scared, but then something shifted. A memory, a voice. Sometimes things fall apart, but that doesn't mean you have to go with them. It was Elon's voice, soft, patient, clear. And hers too layered beneath it. That version of herself who didn't run from vulnerability anymore, who stood in front of chalkboards and conference rooms, who smiled at her own scars. You don't have to go with it. Riley closed her eyes. One breath in, another out. She opened the faucet, splashed cold water on her face, and gripped the edge of the counter harder. You're not that girl anymore, she whispered to her reflection, but you can love her and still leave her behind. A moment later, she unlocked the door. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her stride was solid as she walked back into the presentation room. The murmurs softened as she stepped to the front once more. The display was still lit, waiting. So were they. She cleared her throat. I had a moment, she said simply. Now I'm ready. And then she spoke. Clear, steady, powerful. She didn't race. She didn't shrink. She explained the complexities of quantum friction reduction and plasma efficiency like they were parts of a poem only she had the right to recite. Her voice never cracked. Her eyes never left the audience. When she finished, the room was silent for half a second, then erupted in applause. Not polite applause, earnest, long-standing. She nodded once softly and left the stage without lingering. She didn't need the praise. She had earned something better. Later that evening, back in her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed, still in her conference attire, hair messily pinned up, eyeliner slightly smudged. She picked up her phone and typed one message. Riley didn't run. Just wanted you to know. The reply came 30 seconds later. Elon, proud is an understatement. You're in orbit now. She smiled. Not the small, uncertain smile of someone doubting the ground beneath them. This one was earned, solid, quietly victorious. She placed the phone down beside her notebook, opened a blank page, and wrote, The hero isn't the one who never falls. The hero is the one who learns how to rise alone and chooses to keep going. This time, she underlined the word chooses. She wasn't broken. She wasn't small. She wasn't saved by anyone. She saved herself, and she knew it. Visual prompt English. A hyper-realistic, high-definition photograph set in a clean, modern restroom with soft overhead lighting and a large wall mirror above a sleek white sink. Riley Vega, a 26-year-old woman with light olive skin and an angular face, stands alone, both hands gripping the sink edge. Her medium-length dark brown hair is tied in a messy knot with loose strands around her face. She wears a dark blazer over a charcoal gray blouse, slightly disheveled from emotion. Her eyes are red from crying, but her gaze into the mirror is calm and resolute. A subtle trail of water on her cheeks and a crumpled paper towel on the counter suggest a recent struggle. The atmosphere is emotionally intense, capturing the exact moment she reclaims her strength and prepares to return, not as someone broken, but as someone who chooses to rise. The familiar hum of the SpaceX campus hit her like a memory turned tangible. It had been nearly 8 months since Riley Vega last stepped foot here, not as a technician, not as a visitor, but as herself. And now, she returned not in uniform, not with a mop or a notebook clutched to her chest, but as an invited guest. Her name, Dr. Riley Vega, Novodyne Fellow, was printed on a minimalist white placard just outside the auditorium. Above it, Special Guest Lecture, Ion Propulsion and Inner Gravity. She almost laughed at the title. She hadn't chosen it. Someone from the education outreach team had, but it was fitting. Because she'd come to talk about rockets, yes, but also about what it means to carry yourself through vacuum, to accelerate despite drag, to chart a path when you feel like nothing around you can help you find direction. She stood just off stage as the interns filed into their seats, young, sharp-eyed, buzzing with ambition and nerves. Some of them reminded her of herself, before confidence had roots, when survival still wore the mask of indifference. She adjusted the mic clipped to her collar, ran her fingers once across the edge of her palm, and took a breath. When the stage manager nodded, she stepped into the light. No trembling, no script, just presence. "Hi," she began. "I'm Riley, and I used to clean floors here." That caught them off guard. A ripple of awkward laughter. "I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean that I was literally the overnight janitor. My first experiments in fluid dynamics involved mopping up spilled coffee from research pods while sketching propulsion models in the margins of outdated manuals." The room relaxed into a smile. "I'm here today not because I took a straight line," she continued, "but because I didn't stop walking even when the gravity hurt." She spoke about ion propulsion, about charged particles, electric fields, potential, and inertia. But she wove in other truths too, about failure, panic, shame, and rebirth. She told them how intelligence had never been her greatest obstacle. Belonging had. "And if you've ever felt like you snuck in here," she said near the end, "like someone made a mistake letting you through the door, I want you to know something. Everyone feels that, even the ones who pretend they don't. The question isn't whether you deserve to be here. The question is what you'll do anyway." A girl in the front row, maybe 19, maybe 20, raised her hand. Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "What if I think I don't deserve to try?" The room went still. Riley walked toward her slowly, kneeling slightly so they were eye level. "Mauriceing isn't the point," she said gently. "Fear doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human. The real question is, what will you do even while you're afraid?" The girl's eyes shimmered. She nodded. The audience clapped, not a thunderous ovation, but the kind that comes from genuine resonance. They weren't clapping for a performance. They were clapping for truth. And in the very back row, leaning against the doorframe, Elon Musk stood with his arms crossed, a soft smile pulling at one corner of his mouth. Riley saw him. She didn't falter. She didn't rush toward him. She let the moment breathe. After the session, as the interns filtered out, still buzzing, she stepped into the hallway where Elon waited. He was wearing a simple black jacket, slightly faded, the same way he always had. The look in his eyes hadn't changed either, steady, analytical, kind beneath the calculation. "You didn't need me today," he said. "No," she replied, "but I wanted you to know." She pulled something from her bag, an old, well-worn envelope, the red one, now soft at the corners but intact. "I still carry this," she said, "not because I'm stuck, but because it reminds me of the moment I chose not to be." He nodded. "You launched. And you were the ignition," she said, the words simple and heavy with meaning. "You didn't save me, but you stood still long enough for me to find my own balance. And that changed everything." Elon didn't speak for a moment. Then, with a slight tilt of his head and a rare softness in his voice, he said. "And now, you're your own rocket." Riley smiled, not the uncertain smile of her early days, not the strained one of survival, but the real kind. The kind you grow into. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. Respect doesn't always need touch. Before she left, she turned back once more. "You know," she said over her shoulder, "you were right about black holes." "How so?" "They preserve information. Nothing really disappears." Elon's eyes twinkled. "Not even you." Riley Vega walked out of SpaceX that day with her head high, her notebook tucked under one arm, and a room full of young minds still echoing with her words. And above her, the sky stretched wide and endless. Just like her orbit. It was late. The kind of late when everything hums quietly, machines powering down, fluorescent lights ticking into rest mode, and only the soft buzz of emergency exit signs left to remind the walls they still had purpose. Riley Vega walked alone through the west wing of SpaceX's original research campus. Her boots echoed faintly against the tiles, each step deliberate, each breath grounding. She had asked for no one to meet her. No tour, no announcement. This visit wasn't official. It was personal. In her hand was a single dry erase marker. Not symbolic, not ceremonial. Just one tool she had carried for years, ever since she left behind janitor's carts and survival mode thinking in exchange for equations, lectures, breakthroughs, and her name printed on patents. But now she was back, not to revisit the past, to acknowledge it. She paused outside the small room at the end of the corridor, 3AB. The door was slightly ajar, as if it had been expecting her. When she stepped inside, the lights clicked on slowly, flickering with that familiar hum. The room was unchanged. Same crooked chalkboard, still stained with remnants of ideas long erased, the frame chipped in the corner where she once leaned her shoulder. Same metal stool in the back. Same faint scuff marks on the wall from a mop bucket she used to drag in silence. She stood for a moment without moving, letting it all come back, not with pain, but with perspective. Then, she stepped forward and uncapped the marker. She stared at the board for a while, not thinking, just feeling. Then, slowly, she began to write. Not a formula for propulsion, not a theorem for thrust, not even a quote. This was something else. It looked like an equation, but it wasn't conventional math. It was language, one she had invented for herself. A sequence of symbols, glyphs, loops and curves, lines intersecting circles that contained fragments of movement and memory. The way she shaped the first mark then mirrored it threefold. The arc that resembled orbital decay, but also a heartbeat once under stress. An elegant spiral drawn in one confident, continuous motion. It wasn't meant to be solved. It was meant to be witnessed. A memorial in symbols. An offering. At the center, she drew a shape like an incomplete orbit left intentionally open, expanding outward. She stepped back and looked at it. It wasn't beautiful in the traditional sense, but it was hers. It was everything. Her grief, her triumph, her first night mopping in silence, her last day at Novodyne, her notebook, her breakdown, her rise. Behind the glass, in the hallway, a familiar figure had appeared. Elon Musk. He didn't enter. He simply watched from the other side of the glass. Arms crossed, face unreadable but open. As always, present without intrusion. Riley saw him. She smiled, soft and slow. Then she opened the door. "You saw?" "I did." She walked toward him, the marker still in her hand. "I never thought I'd be back here like this," she said. "I always hoped you would," Elon replied. There was something different in his voice. A quiet reverence. Not pride, not ownership. Something closer to gratitude. "I didn't come back for nostalgia," she said. "I came to write something new. Something that doesn't need to be understood, just accepted, just seen." He nodded. She looked him in the eyes, unwavering. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, even when I made it hard, even when I tried to disappear." "You didn't disappear," he replied. "You were just orbiting your own gravity." She chuckled. "Yeah, well, thanks for not ejecting me into deep space." He smiled. "I didn't pull you forward," he said. "I just stood still long enough for you to find your own momentum." A long silence stretched between them. Not awkward, not heavy, sacred. "You know," she added, lowering her voice, "you were the spark, the ignition sequence, the first launch code I ever trusted." Elon looked at her then with something deeper than admiration, something that felt almost like awe. "And now," he said quietly, "you're your own rocket." She didn't answer. She stepped forward and hugged him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't long, but it was everything. The kind of embrace that said we saw each other when it mattered most. The kind of embrace that spoke of endings and beginnings all at once. When they parted, neither said goodbye. She turned, walked slowly past the chalkboard one last time, and left the room with the same steady pace that had carried her through fear, failure, and fire. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because she had written her truth. She had faced the mirror and survived the echo. And now she moved forward not as a girl running from gravity, but as a woman creating her own orbit. Elon remained in the hallway, alone, staring at the chalkboard through the glass. His reflection stared back, smaller than he remembered. For a moment, he didn't see rockets. He didn't see Mars. He saw a single dry erase mark, still wet at the edge. A symbol for something unmeasurable. Legacy, not the kind etched in steel or launched beyond the stratosphere, but the kind that lives in someone else's propulsion, the kind that outlasts silence, the kind that rewrites equations not on boards but in lives. And now, if you've made it this far, if you felt even a flicker of something real in Riley's journey, do me a favor. Look out your window, just for a second. Where are you watching this from? What city? What corner of the world is your orbit right now? Drop it in the comments. Seriously, not just because it helps the algorithm, though hey, let's be honest, it does, but because Riley's story isn't just hers. It belongs to anyone who's ever felt invisible and kept going anyway. And if one part of this hit you differently, made you think, breathe, cry, or smile, tell us which part. You never know who's scrolling through the comments needing exactly what you felt. We're all just rockets trying to find the courage to launch. So, where are you launching from?